grew up having gone to a really weird church. That's what, and I hope that is true. That there was nothing, whenever they meet other kids, you know, like, oh, I hate church, they never talk to us, and like, I hope our kids just say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Hopefully getting that in there. Pardon me, I have a cough lozenge in my mouth, so I'm going to be toying with that as we talk today. What I think is a very simple lesson, a very straightforward thing, and the title Lost and Found, that I think we could do a lot worse than put over the front door of our church, that this is the Lost and Found section. That every one of us, isn't it true, that whether we're believers today, maybe you're still, you're not sure about that, you just know you found a good group of people here, and you're overhearing our stories that we talk about, the teachings that Jesus said, but ultimately, all of us were lost, and Jesus, the Good Shepherd, or the woman who cleans the house, goes seeking for us. There's kind of a thought, and it'll be another lesson for another time, but there's this thought sometimes that I've been so bad that God would never want me back. Pretty regularly, as I invite people here, I kind of get the joke that, oh, you don't want me to come to your church, lightning will strike. Or, oh, the roof will cave in. And I assure that we have very strong metal beams holding up the roof of our church building, and you can come and give them a test. And so I know they're partly joking, but I think underneath that, maybe they're saying something that we believe sometimes, right? That, oh, I've gone so far away from God, and you know, He would never want me back. And a couple of movies I want to reference this morning. One is the great philosopher Forrest Gump. And you remember Lieutenant Dan that was there, and he'd been wounded in the war, and after the war was over, they had gone back to civilian life, and Lieutenant Dan, who was his commanding officer, Forrest Gump's commanding officer, was in a wheelchair, paraplegic, legs didn't work, and there's a time, I believe it might have been a New Year's Eve, and of course outside was all the celebration that goes on around New Year's Eve, and it was contrasted with Lieutenant Dan and Forrest Gump in this quiet, kind of dingy motel room, and the celebration outside was contrasted with kind of just the disillusionment on the inside. Here Lieutenant Dan, he thought he was supposed to, give his life for his country and be a hero, and here he'd only lost his legs, and he felt like less than a human, and he says, I keep going down to the VA, and they keep asking me if I found God or not. Lieutenant Dan's kind of angry. Later in the movie, he makes peace with God, but one of the things he says is, there's a television preacher, I think, on the television, and Lieutenant Dan turns to Forrest Gump and says, Gump, have you found God? Forrest Gump says, I didn't know I was supposed to be looking for him, sir. We have that question, right? That's part of our language too. Have someone found God? And I'm not picking on that language. I think that's correct language. But I wonder sometimes if it's not so much that we find God as God finds us. A couple of people I want to highlight for you. This is a picture of William Wilberforce. And if you don't know, if you're not a historian, William Wilberforce was a British politician. And he played a core and pivotal role in the abolishing of slavery in England, and then of course throughout Europe, but primarily there in England. And so much of the role he played came about because of his faith. In the movie Amazing Grace, a recent movie that was kind of highlighting that, about the slave trade, about William Wilberforce's role in bringing the abolishment of that gross institution. There's a scene in the movie, it's based on a true story. I didn't do enough research to know if this scene was true or not. But in the movie, there's a scene where William Wilberforce's butler walks in on him and catches him on his knees praying. And the butler asks, oh, sir, have you found God? To which William Wilberforce responded, I think God found me. Aren't we like that? Sometimes we run from God, and if there's any finding going to be done, it's going to have to be Him that goes out and does that. A contemporary of William Wilberforce wrote this song. Read the words with me. I won't wait to sing it. We had some good singing this morning, by the way. We'll make you sing it. Read the words with me. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. The person who wrote those words, John Newton, also lived in the late 17th, early 18th century, and was a contemporary of William Wilberforce. Except kind of a different journey. John Newton grew up the son of a slave trader, someone who captained ships from Africa to the U.S. and to the East Coast. Ironically, recently we've had our president visit Charleston, South Carolina. There's tragedies that go on that were race-related, and one of the things that he was caught on the news doing was singing the song Amazing Grace. And it was John Newton that would, even at 20 years old, at 11 years old, he joined his father and went on some of these ship excursions bringing slaves from Africa. And by 20, he was captaining his own slave ship from Africa to Charleston, South Carolina. And I won't do his story justice. It's just an amazing story, and it's much more nuanced and up and down and more like real life than I'm going to present it this morning. But he grew up in that, but then there was a time where he went through a storm as he was making one of those journeys across the Atlantic, and at that point he called out to God, according to his memoirs. But he says later, it's not until 3 decades later does he say, no, I shudder to call myself a true follower of Jesus at that moment because my life did not reflect that. And later he came, and I wonder if that's the time that he found God, because there was a storm. Isn't that how so many of our stories work, right? It's in crisis, it's in struggle, it's in suffering that we call out to God, and that's right, that's good. But I wonder if that's the moment he found God, but it wasn't until maybe 3 decades later that God found him and said, I have a mission for you. Eventually he leaves the slave trade, repulsed by his accommodation of that and his involvement in that. He becomes an ordained clergyman, he becomes an ordained minister, and becomes someone who preaches the gospel. But he still does not speak about his time as a slave trader because he was so ashamed of that. And it wasn't until several decades later does he come out. The first time he speaks out against it officially is a publication, and he starts speaking out. And over time, he becomes a strong opponent of slavery. And so the story of how the stories mix and kind of revolve around, this one phrase, I once was lost, but now am found. Let's read from Luke chapter 15. It's the only place we'll be this morning. I'll reread what Kevin did, and then I'll read a second one. That maybe it emphasizes and highlights the idea that maybe it's not so much that we find God, but that God has always been seeking and has found us. If you're a believer this morning, it takes all the pride out of it, doesn't it? In our humanness, we like to think, well, just because I'm smart, it's because I can see better than other people. That's why I'm a follower. Versus, if we really back up and understand these stories of Jesus, we see that really, yes, maybe we called out to him at a certain time, but really our true conversion happens when and because he is seeking us and has finally, we've let him find us. We've quit running from him. 2 stories. Jesus is speaking here. Here's the context. Chapter 15, starting in verse 1. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. All you have to know here is the tax collectors and the sinners are the bad guys. They're the sinners. They're the ones that everyone looks at, especially the church people, and say, that's what's wrong with this country. It's those people. If those people would be more like me, things would be better. So they're the, quote, sinners. Now really everyone in the story is a sinner, but according to the Pharisees, and what you have to know about the Pharisees, they're the religious people. And by the time Jesus comes on the scene, religion has kind of perverted and morphed into something to where it's about me doing good things. And when I do good things, that's when God loves me. When I do good things, that's when I deserve God's love. And if you'll just do good things, maybe you can deserve God's love too. And it's in that context that Jesus speaks and calls it 180 degrees opposite from that. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." Then Jesus told them this parable. "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep.' I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." Now keep in mind, there's really no such thing. Jesus, knowing that they're hard-headed, kind of like we are, says, "Let me tell you a second story." And I love this because he's also speaking, especially when there's the religious people kind of drawing a line and saying, "Oh, you're not in, you're the outsiders, you don't belong, God can't love you, you can't belong until you start behaving." And I hope you remember a lesson just a few weeks ago where we said that's going to be different because we want to follow Jesus. You're welcome to belong here even before God helps you behave. And so when they're drawing lines, then Jesus says, "Now let me tell you a story about a woman." Now it would have been unusual because the women in the audience would have perked up and said, "The rabbis never teach to us. We're second-class citizens here." But Jesus is different. He's saying, or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one of them. It's not in the text, but a lot of the commentators and commentaries suggest that what's pointed to here was kind of this bridal gift. And it would have been kind of like a ring with 9 little diamonds and you lose one of the diamonds. It would have been kind of this a gift, a collage of coins, and you would have missed one of the coins. So it wasn't just monetary for her. It was sentimental and valuable even beyond the value of the coin. So she loses one of the coins. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, "Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin." And Jesus repeats again, "In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." You understand, obviously in the parables, we're to find ourselves in the story. I want to invite you on Wednesday evenings. We're kind of walking through some parables, and even last Wednesday we had some rich discussion around one of the parables of Jesus. But what we find in the parables is Jesus invites us to ask which one of those, who are we in the story? And certainly that is right, but this morning I want us to understand who is God in the story. You understand that most of the parables begin with something like, the kingdom of heaven is like, and the kingdom of God is like. Because we operate on an earthly level, and what Jesus does is take these earthly things like lost coins and lost sheep and shepherds and ladies cleaning their houses, and he says, let me give you a little bit of insight into the way that things are under the King, under God the King. Not just in heaven someday, but life under the King right now. And it's very different. The physical elements of the story are ridiculous if we try to apply them in an earthly way. Only whenever we understand he's giving us a glimpse into how things are under God, then we say, wow, really? And I want you to hear that because it's so opposite. Even I'm struggling now, and I say 180 degrees opposite. I want to say it's 360 degrees the opposite, but that would be the same. And it's so backwards. And if you read the stories, you would say, oh, wow, that's a little different than I think. That's a little different than the world believes. Oh, that makes sense to me. Then I think we don't have ears to hear, and we don't have eyes to see what Jesus is saying. No, the reaction should be, that's ridiculous. Why is it like that? The third story, we won't go into it. The third story, there's a trilogy actually of parables here. The next one is the lost son, the prodigal son. So you have this same idea here. And sometimes we'll teach through the lost son and we'll focus on which son are you. And again, that's not wrong or bad, but really when you put that back in the trilogy, back in the series of stories that Jesus tells, the focus in the other two, we never say that the main character of the lost coin story is a coin. We never say that the main character of the lost sheep story is one of the sheep. It's the shepherd. The main character in the lost coin story is the woman. And so the same way, the main character in the lost son story is the father. The focus isn't what's on what is lost and found, it's on the finder. Does that make sense? That Jesus is trying to reveal to us a little bit about God and who He is. And we understand, maybe you've heard this term, that to find God, you have to have a seeker's heart. Jeremiah tells us that, chapter 29. Right after that big 29:11 verse with the plans for you to prosper you, 2 verses later, he says, you will find God when you seek Him with all your heart. You have to have a seeker's heart. And I think that obviously that's true. But you understand also that God has a seeker's heart. God is not an aloof king that sits on His throne and when you run away, He just says, oh well, I've got plenty of other people. They rebelled against me. They wandered off. They got lost. It's their fault. Good luck finding your way back. He's also a father who gets off of the throne and He sets His crown aside and He seeks you out. What I want to do is have you think on a couple levels. If you are in Christ this morning, I want you just to remember how good God is. Think through all the different things that had to happen in your life for you to come to faith. That yes, you saw it, you were open, you had eyes, you had ears, and you turned to Him at some point. That's the way the stories go. Then there's more celebration than those who don't need to repent, right? Change your mind, change your direction. But for some of us, we were just blessed to have been taught about Jesus from very, very young. And we take that for granted. You know, there are others. I have conversations with you, and at some point I'm going to interview you so that you can share with those who grew up in homes like that. That there's a holy jealousy. It's like, oh, I wish I had a dad who taught me those. I wish my mom was there. And so take that for granted. You understand that's even God seeking you out, going and finding you. Sometimes we get it upside down, right? And because we're on earth and that's the heavenly realm and do that 180-degree different thing. That I wonder sometimes, because we come from a certain place, that's my background. I'm so blessed in that, and I so take it for granted. And I wonder sometimes if those who come from that background, maybe because there's kind of a head start, if you will, right? So, oh wow, those people are ahead of me and those people are better than me. I wonder if it's God not saying, you know what, if I don't start you out very early, you're not going to get it. Someone has to grow up in the non-Christian homes, and you know what? You're strong enough, so I'll put you there. You're going to get it whenever I speak to you as adults, so I'll put you there. But I don't know about these guys. I'm going to have to start them very, very early. They're extra hard-headed, so we're going to start it out very early. So maybe you grew up in that. Maybe there's a friend. You're here today. We make it really hard for you to find this church. We kind of hide it down here at the bottom of the hill. We're not on some, great, out on the highway. We don't have advertisements going on television. If you're here, it's because there's some relationship, and I want to suggest that's God seeking you. That's God going out and finding you and inviting you here to hear about His goodness and His love. Those of you who came to Christ as adults later in life, who is it that, if I asked if I could go around the room, it would be, well, I met someone, or I met someone who then introduced me to someone, or I wouldn't have met that person except that this person knew this person, put me together with that person. That's God seeking you. Do you understand? Yes, you must have a seeker's heart, but God has a seeker's heart, and the object of His seeking and affection is you. That's amazing. He turns the house upside down. He dusts the corners till he finds his precious coin that he's lost. He seeks, he leaves those who are safe in together, and he goes out and finds, and he searches up and down and through the storms and through the night until he finds you. Maybe you're here this morning, you're on the other side of that fence, literally. It's like, well, I don't know. I'm listening, and I'm interested. This sounds a little different, but I love. We have several people who are coming quite regularly, and one of the things that one person in particular always tells me, he said, "No, I tell people that I go to your church, and I don't know how it's my church, but okay, I go to your church." And he says, I tell them I'm not really big into religion or anything, but I go to that church. I'm there almost every week. And I think what that does is to say, I'm in conversation with someone else, a lifeguard at one of the beaches we go to, and again, someone who it's taken years to build enough of a relationship, and we're talking, and one time, I shared with him, I'm a preacher, and just very quickly he said, "Oh yeah, I've never really been interested or into religion at all." He just left it at that. And so we built this relationship. So about 2 weeks ago, I walked by the tower, paddle out, and he says, "Hey, I want to talk with you." And so I'm dating this new girl. She's like a new Christian, right? So she's talking to me about God and stuff, and so we have some conversations about different things, and of course what comes from her, she's pretty churchy language, and he's not sure about it. He's a pretty good thinker. He wouldn't, he's one of these, he's a lifeguard. He's kind of your stereotypical lifeguard, right? So he's, good-looking guy, young guy, athletic, and cool guy, whatever all that stuff means, and so you wouldn't just peg him and think, wow, he's probably a deep philosophical thinker. But as we got to talking, he said, "No, I sit up in this tower all day, and I just have time to think." And so we get to talking, and he says something about, oh yeah, she's afraid, she's saved, but she's afraid she might not get to heaven because, she's lived a worldly life and these kind of things. And so with him, I said, I want you to tell her, say fear, you shouldn't be driven by fear, you should be driven by love. He said, "Oh yeah, see, that makes sense to me." He said, "You know what, there's actually a verse in the Bible that says, perfect love casts out all fear." He says, "Oh, that's good, hang on, let me write that down." I said, "You know what? Let's be talking about this, and I'll feed you Bible verses so that, because she's all into it, you're kind of in trouble with her because you're not all into it. And when she talks to you, you can say, oh yeah, but then in Luke chapter 15, Jesus says the story about that. Oh, I like that. Be feeding me that stuff, okay?" So I don't want to push too hard, but I know an open window when I see it, so I'm crawling through. I don't need a door, I just need a crack in the window. And a crowbar. One day I was breaking into the church building here, and someone came up, another church member came up, and I was having to jimmy it open because I forgot my keys, right? And I said, "Oh, how are you going to do that?" I said, "I wasn't always a preacher." So now, Jesus told Peter, hey, they used to be fishermen, now I'll make you fishers for men. So now maybe that's the whole, I'm going to help you break into hearts and share God, right? I don't know if that quite is a parallel. So a couple weeks later, we come back, this after we've been on vacation, I come up, and first thing says, "Oh good, I was hoping you would come by." I said, "Oh yeah," I went to church with you. "All right, what'd you think?" And it's a place that I probably wouldn't find a home either, okay? Just kind of a certain flavor that you'd be like, yeah, that's probably not my place either. And in fact, it probably is kind of the opposite of us, all right? If we're over here, it's probably like way over here, right? And so I'm still trying to tell him, said, I was hoping you would tell me that, wow, you really felt something there, and you heard God there. That's what I really hope. And so we got to talking, and it's more this philosophical kind of stuff. And he's just talking about, he said, wow, you know what? I've never considered myself religious. In fact, I don't really like religion. But then as we got to talking by the end of the conversation, well, I don't know, maybe I am religious. And it's because there's this idea of religion, right? There's this idea of what Christianity is. Whether it's accurate or not is really beside the point. Whether the media plays up this certain view of religion or not is really beside the point. It's the perception. And I think one of the perception of religion, and especially then Christianity, of course, is what we're talking about, following Jesus, and then Christian churches, that so for so many people, that their view of God is determined and painted by their view of Christian religion or church. And I think one of those is, you're bad, you've run away, and you have to come back to God. Now again, do I disagree with that? No. But I think there's something deeper there, that lets God be something He's not. It paints God into only a half truth. Instead, you have here, Jesus is he's a shepherd who gets his hands dirty, and he's going out seeking you. And these conversations aren't an accident. Your growing up is not an accident. The people you've come into contact, so you've come to faith, not an accident. That you're here today, you're not a believer, not an accident. Conversations at the lifeguard tower, not an accident. That is God actively seeking people that He loves. That's the heart of God. I want that to be my heart. A couple closing points. Whether or not you're looking for Him, He's looking for you. Let me just end with this blessing. May you have eyes to see Him. May you stop running so fast that He catches you. And not that you find Him, but that He has found you. And you begin to flirt with understanding and grasping why it's called amazing grace. Jared, come on up, brother. Let's we're going to sing a couple songs here. Let's stand and sing these. I'd love to talk with you.